My stepdaughter falsely accused me of sexual harassment and demanded $50,000 to recant, but I recorded every word and exposed her to everyone, destroying her life forever. I'm 46 years old. I work as a construction project manager, and what happened last year basically destroyed my second marriage and almost ruined my reputation. The truth is, I still have trouble processing all of this. But I need to tell it because there are days when I wake up and I can't believe it actually happened. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I met Rebecca about 4 years ago at a local art exhibition, one of those things you go to because a client invites you and you end up staying longer than you expected. She was an art teacher. She was 43 years old, had a 6-year-old daughter named Alexis, and had been single since the girl's father left them when Alexis was barely 2 years old. Patrick, the ex, had taken off to Texas and basically disappeared from their lives, except for a monthly check he sent religiously, but with no real contact with his daughter. I was coming off a divorce from Karen, my first wife, but we'd separated on good terms, no kids, no drama, just two people who realized they wanted different things in life. Karen and I still talked from time to time, like that weird friendship that sometimes works after a marriage. Rebecca seemed amazing to me from the start, sensitive, caring, with that maternal energy I'd never really experienced. We got married after 2 years of dating, and honestly I thought I was doing something good, like forming a family, being the father figure Alexis never had. I have a 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nothing flashy but comfortable, and when they moved in it seemed perfect. Alexis was 16 at the time, and at first everything seemed normal. I mean, she had her difficult teenager moments, but nothing that made me suspect what would come later. The first few months were a honeymoon phase, let's say. Rebecca was happy. Alexis seemed to be adapting well to her new school. I continued with my construction projects, which were going pretty well. But looking back, I should have seen the signs, because they started almost immediately after the move. First, it was her room. Alexis decided she needed a complete remodel. And when I say complete, I mean complete. Special paint, new furniture, decor she'd seen on Instagram from some influencer. Rebecca looked at me with those eyes like, please do it for her. She's adapting to a new life. And I agreed because, well, I wanted her to feel comfortable in what was now her home. I spent like $3,000 on that room, maybe more. I don't remember exactly, but it was a considerable amount. Then came the Paris trip. Alexis was 17 at that point, and her friends were going to go with their families during spring break, and she wanted to go too. Not with us, mind you, but alone with her friends, like a girls' trip. The cost was absurd, like $4,500, not counting the money she'd want for expenses there. And when I told her no, that it was too much money and too much responsibility for her age, we had our first serious fight. Rebecca ended up mediating and we found a compromise, a shorter and cheaper trip to New York with supervision from one of the mothers, but Alexis was angry with me for weeks. The thing is, every time I said no to something, Rebecca would appear with some explanation of why we should reconsider, how Alexis had suffered so much without a father figure, how Patrick was never there for her, and I'd end up giving in more times than I should have. When she turned 18, there was the car situation. Alexis got her license and expected me to buy her a car, not just any car, but a used BMW she'd seen at a dealership. I told her she could use the 2015 Honda Civic I had as a second vehicle, perfectly functional, but she said her friends would make fun of her. Rebecca again, with the speech about how Alexis needed to feel secure and accepted, that adolescence was difficult, blah blah blah. I didn't buy her the BMW, but I ended up buying her a newer 2018 Toyota Corolla than the Civic because, according to Rebecca, she needed something safer and more modern. 3 months later, Alexis crashed the Corolla in a mall parking lot. It wasn't serious, but the insurance went up and the car needed repairs of like $2,500. Her explanation was that she was distracted with her phone. She didn't even seem to feel bad about it. Things kept escalating. One day I came home from work and there was a dog in the house, a golden retriever puppy that Alexis had bought without consulting us. I have nothing against dogs, in fact I like them, but this was my house and she just decided she wanted one and brought it home. When I asked her how she'd paid for it, turns out she'd used one of Rebecca's credit cards. The dog cost $1,200 from a breeder plus another $500 in initial supplies. Rebecca begged me to let her keep it because she'd already gotten attached to it, and I ended up being the one who paid all the vet bills and food because, surprise, surprise, Alexis had no job or way to support it. When she was 19, came the modeling phase. Alexis convinced Rebecca that she needed a professional portfolio. Photo shoots with expensive photographers, new clothes for the photos, the whole package. I tried to be reasonable and told her to first research the industry, maybe start with smaller, more local things, but she insisted she needed to do it right from the beginning or it wouldn't be worth it. Rebecca pushed. I partially gave in. Paid like $2,000 for the portfolio, and it turns out Alexis went to 2 auditions, didn't get anything, and then completely lost interest. The portfolio is in some drawer in her room gathering dust. The straw that broke the camel's back came when Alexis was 20, about a year and a half ago approximately. She came home one afternoon, super excited with this business idea. She'd been researching. She wanted to start a skincare product line. You know, creams, serums, those things that sell on Instagram. She sat me down in the living room and gave me a presentation on her laptop, very enthusiastic, talking about profit margins and target demographics, and all these words that sounded like she'd pulled them from some YouTube video about entrepreneurship. The problem was, she needed $7,000 to start, to buy initial inventory from a wholesale supplier, and to pay for brand design and the website. I asked her basic questions, like, have you researched the legal requirements for selling cosmetics? Do you have an actual business plan? What's your marketing strategy beyond posting on Instagram? Have you tested the products? Do you know your competition? And for each question, she had vague answers or told me she'd figure it out as she went along. The truth is, it sounded like one of those ideas you see on social media where they promise you'll be a millionaire selling products you drop ship from China, basically a pyramid scheme disguised as a legitimate business. I told her no, that I wasn't going to give her $7,000 for something that had no solid plan behind it, that if she really wanted to do this, she needed to first educate herself, make a real business plan, maybe start smaller, get a job to save some initial capital. Alexis got angry, obviously, and Rebecca immediately jumped to her defense, saying I was stifling her daughter's dreams, that Patrick never believed in her, and now I was doing the same thing. I tried to explain that it wasn't about believing or not believing, but about being realistic and responsible with money, that I didn't have an extra $7,000 to throw at something, with such a high probability of failing, that I had a mortgage, bills, retirement, savings. The argument got ugly. Alexis left the room crying. Rebecca accused me of being selfish and controlling, and I was left there wondering how the hell a simple refusal had turned into me being the villain of the story. The next few days were tense. Alexis barely spoke to me. Rebecca was cold to me, and I started to feel that uncomfortable feeling in my own house that I'd done something terribly wrong even though I knew I hadn't. But then things took a turn I never saw coming. One night I came home from work, and Rebecca was sitting in the living room with a face I'd never seen on her, like pale and serious, and she told me we needed to talk. I sat down and she started telling me that Alexis had told her something very disturbing, that I supposedly had entered her room when she was changing, that I'd made inappropriate comments about her body, that I'd touched her in an uncomfortable way on a couple of occasions. I told Rebecca that was completely false, that I'd never done anything remotely like that I didn't even enter Alexis's room without knocking first, that this was absolute insanity. Rebecca was crying and telling me she wanted to believe me, but that she had to believe her daughter, that victims deserve to be heard. All that rhetoric that sounds good in theory but becomes a nightmare when it's used against you falsely. I asked her when these things supposedly happened, and the dates she gave me were absurd. One of them I wasn't even home because I was at a construction site 2 hours away, supervising an emergency. I had time records that proved it, but Rebecca didn't want to hear my explanations. She was in full protection mode of her daughter, and I realized in that moment that it didn't matter what I said. She'd already made her decision. She told me she thought maybe I should stay at a hotel for a few days while they processed all this, and I told her this was my house, that if anyone was going to leave, it wasn't going to be me, especially when I was being falsely accused of something so horrible. The argument lasted hours. It was one of the worst nights of my life, and eventually, Rebecca went to sleep in Alexis's room, and I stayed in ours wondering what the hell had just happened. The next day, I called a lawyer. Not because I was going to sue anyone at that point, but because I needed to know how screwed I was. The lawyer, a guy named Martin who'd worked on family cases before, explained to me that false accusations of abuse are more common than people think, and that they're incredibly difficult to defend against because the system is designed, rightly so in most cases, to believe victims. He told me I needed to start documenting absolutely everything, that I couldn't have any interaction with Alexis without witnesses or without recording, that I needed to be extremely careful because an accusation like this, even without proof, could destroy my life, my career, everything. That week was surreal. Rebecca and Alexis basically avoided me in my own house. I slept in the guest room. We ate at different times. I tried to talk to Rebecca several times, but she refused to listen to me, said she needed time to think. Alexis didn't even look at me, which in retrospect was perfect because it meant she couldn't accuse me of trying to intimidate her or something. I talked to Karen, my ex-wife, and told her what was happening. Karen knew Rebecca. They'd talked a few times at social events because I'd wanted everyone to get along, and her reaction was immediate. She told me that Rebecca had mentioned months ago that Alexis was very manipulative and had problems with the truth, that once in high school she'd falsely accused a teacher of something similar when he gave her a bad grade, though that accusation never went very far because other students contradicted her. Why had Rebecca never told me that? When I asked her days later in one of our tense conversations, she told me she didn't think it was relevant, that Alexis had been stressed at that time and had misinterpreted the situation with the teacher. Basically, Rebecca had been covering up her daughter's manipulative behavior for years, and now I was paying the price. I asked her directly, "Do you really think I would do something like that?" And she couldn't look me in the eye. When she answered that she didn't know what to believe, that her duty was to protect her daughter. In that moment, I understood there was no way to reason with her while Alexis was in her ear, feeding her lies. I followed my lawyer's advice to the letter. I installed voice-activated recorders in the common areas of the house, perfectly legal in our state because it's my property. I started collecting evidence of everything. The security cameras I already had outside the house that showed my arrival and departure times, text messages with contractors and clients that proved where I was at specific times, credit card statements that showed purchases in distant places when I was supposedly at home harassing Alexis. I also talked to the neighbors, discreetly, asking them if they'd ever seen anything inappropriate or heard anything disturbing from my house. Everyone said no, that it had always seemed to them that I was respectful and professional, that they'd never had any concerns. But the most valuable piece of evidence came from the voice recordings. About 3 weeks after installing the recorders, I captured a conversation between Alexis and a friend who came to visit her when Rebecca was at work, and I supposedly was too. Though that day I'd come back early because a meeting was canceled. I was in my home office with the door closed when I heard voices in the living room, and the recorders caught everything. Alexis was laughing and telling her friend that I was an idiot for not giving her the money for her business, that she decided to teach me a lesson, that her mom would believe anything she said because she always did. The friend asked her if she didn't feel bad about lying about something so serious, and Alexis responded, literally, that she didn't care because I deserved it for being stingy, and that eventually I'd give in and give her the money so she'd stop making drama. When I heard that recording the first time, I had to play it like 3 times to make sure it was real. There it was, a complete confession that it had all been a lie, that it was manipulation to get money. I sent the recording to my lawyer immediately, and he told me it was pure gold, but not to confront Alexis yet, to keep collecting evidence because a confession is good, but a pattern of behavior is better. So I kept documenting, kept recording, kept collecting every piece of information I could. I collected everything I could. I got bank statements showing all the expenses I'd covered for Alexis, from the room remodel to the modeling portfolio, everything documented with dates and amounts. I talked to the school and obtained copies of her record. With permission, since technically I was her stepfather and guardian figure in the home, and found a pattern of problematic behavior, teacher reports about lies, drama with classmates, even an incident where she'd falsely accused another student of stealing her phone when it turned out she'd left it in her locker. I searched her, social media, mainly Instagram, and found posts where she complained about me, saying things like, "My stepfather is the worst, he never supports me in anything. I wish my mom had never married him. That kind of thing that in context showed she had resentment toward me, specifically over money issues. I also got text messages that Alexis had sent to Rebecca, that Rebecca showed me thinking they'd make me look bad, but that actually showed her manipulation tactics. Messages like, "Mom, if you don't make James give me the money, I'm going to have to go live with Dad," knowing perfectly well that Patrick had no interest in her living with him. Or, "Mom, James makes me feel uncomfortable in this house. I don't know if I can keep living here," playing the emotional card to pressure Rebecca. Each message was another piece of the puzzle showing who Alexis really was. Then came the moment that changed everything. About 5 weeks after the start of this disaster, Alexis sent me a text message. It was completely unexpected because we hadn't had direct contact this whole time. The message said, "We need to talk. Come to the coffee shop near the house at 3 p.m. tomorrow. It's important." I forwarded the message to my lawyer and he told me to go, but to record everything. That this sounded like an opportunity for her to incriminate herself more. So I went with my phone in recording mode in my shirt pocket, making sure everything would be heard. I arrived at the coffee shop and Alexis was already there, drinking a latte and looking at her phone. I sat across from her and waited for her to speak. She started with a speech about how this had been very difficult for everyone, how she'd only wanted to be honest about how she felt, blah blah blah. Then she got to the point. She told me she'd been thinking, and that maybe she'd exaggerated some things. That maybe she'd misinterpreted my actions, that she was willing to tell her mom she'd been confused about everything. But, and here's the but, she needed me to understand her perspective, that she had dreams and goals and needed support to achieve them. I asked her directly what she wanted, and she said it without blinking. $50,000. I sat there staring at her in shock. This girl, because that's really what she was, a 20-year-old girl who'd never worked a full day in her life, was blackmailing me for $50,000. I asked her if she was serious, and she said completely that with that money, she could start several businesses, not just the skincare one, but others too, that it would be an investment in her future. And if I didn't give her the money, well, then she'd have to maintain her original story about my inappropriate behavior, maybe even go to the police with a formal complaint. She said it so casually, like she was negotiating the price of a used car and not trying to extort me. I told her I needed time to think, that was a lot of money, and I needed to review my finances. She told me I had a week to decide. I said goodbye and I left that coffee shop feeling physically sick, but also, strangely, relieved. Because now I had everything recorded, her implicit admission that she'd lied and her direct attempt at blackmail. My lawyer heard the recording and told me it was time to end this, that we had enough evidence to confront her and protect myself legally. I spent the next few days preparing for the confrontation. I organized all the evidence in digital folders, ordered the recordings chronologically, prepared a simple presentation that showed the entire pattern of behavior. My lawyer suggested I do it with Rebecca present because it was important for her to see everything at once, without Alexis being able to spin the narrative afterward. I decided to do it on video too, record myself presenting the evidence to have a record of exactly what was said and how they reacted. Sunday afternoon, I called Rebecca and Alexis to the living room. I told them we needed to have a serious conversation about everything that had been happening. Rebecca looked nervous. Alexis irritated but calm, probably thinking I was going to announce I'd give her the money. I told them the last few weeks had been the worst of my life, that being falsely accused of something so horrible had been devastating, but that fortunately, I was someone who believed in documenting things and seeking the truth. I started playing the recordings. First, the conversation where Alexis admitted to lying and said, I deserved it for not giving her money. Rebecca went pale. Alexis started saying that was taken out of context, that I didn't have permission to record her, but I continued. I played the complete coffee shop conversation where she clearly extorted me for $50,000. Then I showed all the financial records of everything I'd spent on her, the manipulative text messages, the school reports, the Instagram posts, the credit card statements with dates and times that proved I wasn't where she said I was when the incident supposedly happened. Rebecca was crying. Alexis started screaming, saying I was a monster for recording her, that this was an invasion of privacy, that she was going to sue me. I responded very calmly that in our state it's perfectly legal to record conversations on your own property and that attempts at extortion are a serious crime. I told her she had two options. She could publicly admit she'd lied and apologize formally, ending this privately, or I could take all this evidence to the police and she could face criminal charges for attempted extortion and possibly for making a false report if she decided to continue with her story. Alexis looked at me with pure hatred. She told me I was a bastard, that she'd only wanted what she deserved, that I had money and was selfish for not sharing it with family. I responded that she wasn't my family. That family doesn't blackmail, doesn't lie, doesn't destroy lives on a whim. Rebecca tried to intervene, saying we all needed to calm down, that maybe we could go to family therapy, that there was a way to resolve this. I looked at her and asked if she really believed there was a way to go back after this, if she really thought I could continue living under the same roof as someone who'd tried to ruin me. I gave them 24 hours to pack their things and leave my house. Rebecca protested, said they had nowhere to go. How could I be so cruel? I reminded her she had friends, family, that she could find an apartment, that frankly that was no longer my problem. Alexis screamed that I couldn't kick them out, that this was her home too now. I informed her the house was solely in my name, that we'd never made any prenuptial agreement because I'd trusted Rebecca, but that legally this was my property, and I had every right to ask them to leave. I also informed her I'd be initiating divorce proceedings immediately. They left the next day. Rebecca still crying, trying to apologize, saying she didn't know Alexis was capable of something like this. I just nodded, didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. Alexis didn't even look at me, just packed her things, including everything I'd paid for. The modeling portfolio, the expensive clothes, everything. After they left, I called a locksmith and changed all the locks. Then I sat in my empty living room and cried for the first time in this whole process, not for them, but for the life I'd imagined we'd have, for the time I'd lost, for the naivety of thinking I could help fix a broken family. But the story didn't end there, because Alexis, being Alexis, couldn't just leave quietly. About a week after moving out, she started posting on social media her version of events. Long posts on Instagram and Facebook about how her stepfather had thrown her and her mom out on the street, how he'd been emotionally abusive, how he'd used his economic power to control them. She didn't mention the original false accusations or the blackmail, obviously, just painted herself as a victim. She even made a GoFundMe asking for donations to help her and her mom start over after escaping an abusive situation. Some of her friends initially believed her and started attacking me in comments and private messages. But then something unexpected happened. Several people who knew her, schoolmates, former friends, started commenting on her posts telling their own stories about Alexis's manipulative behavior. One girl wrote about how Alexis had falsely accused her of stealing money in high school. Another talked about how Alexis had lied about having cancer to get attention and gifts. An ex-boyfriend wrote about how she'd threatened to accuse him of abuse if he didn't buy her expensive things. Her victim narrative crumbled in a matter of days. The GoFundMe was reported and closed for violating terms of service about fraudulent representations. Alexis had to delete her posts and basically disappeared from social media for a while. Rebecca sent me a message asking for forgiveness, saying she finally understood who her daughter really was, that she'd been blind for years. I didn't respond. The divorce was finalized about 6 months ago. It was relatively simple because we had no joint property or children together. She had to pay her own legal fees because I wasn't going to cover that after everything. I've heard through the grapevine, the kind of gossip that circulates in small communities, that Alexis eventually had to get a real job in retail because Rebecca could no longer or didn't want to keep supporting her. That the relationship between them also deteriorated when Alexis started blaming Rebecca for not having defended her false story better. Apparently, Alexis tried to contact Patrick, her biological father, to ask him for money, but he didn't fall for her manipulation either. I don't feel satisfaction hearing that, honestly. I just feel some sadness about what a waste it all was. I'm okay now, I guess. I went back to my normal routine. Work is still good. My construction projects are going well. I had to step back from some charity work I was involved with because several were related to youth. And after all this, I simply don't want to risk being in situations where someone else can make false accusations. It's sad, but it's reality. Karen and I have talked more lately. She's been good support through all this, and has helped me process what happened without judging me for being so blind. The house feels different now. Quieter, but also emptier. Sometimes I wonder if I should have seen the signs earlier. If the problem was that Rebecca never established boundaries with Alexis from when she was little after Patrick left. But then I remind myself that I did what any decent person would do. I tried to be a good father figure. I tried to support my wife and her daughter, and I was punished for it. I can't blame myself for someone else's sociopathy, and that's what I think Alexis is at her core. Someone who simply has no empathy or remorse as long as she gets what she wants. What scares me most about this whole experience is how close I came to having my life completely ruined. If I hadn't recorded those conversations, if I hadn't collected all that evidence, right now I could be facing criminal charges. I could have lost my job, my reputation, everything. And Alexis would probably be somewhere with her $50,000 laughing about how she manipulated me. The system is so biased toward believing accusers, which in most cases is right and necessary, that someone with enough audacity can use that as a weapon. And that's terrifying. I don't know if Rebecca ever really processed that her daughter is capable of this level of manipulation. Part of me hopes she did, that she finally opened her eyes after years of denial. Another part of me suspects she found some way to justify or minimize what happened, that maybe she convinced herself I provoked Alexis's behavior somehow. It doesn't really matter. They're no longer my problem. I've thought about dating someone again eventually, but the idea of trusting another person enough to let them into my life, much less into my house, makes me panic. Maybe with time that'll change, I don't know. My lawyer advised me to keep all the evidence stored indefinitely in case Alexis tries something in the future, some new accusation or civil lawsuit or who knows what. I have copies of everything in the cloud, on external hard drives, in multiple secure places. It's a strange feeling needing to permanently maintain evidence of your innocence, like wearing an emotional bulletproof vest just in case. But that's how things are now, I guess. I've learned that people can be much more cruel and calculating than I thought, that manipulation is a skill, some perfect from a young age, that lies can be devastating weapons when used correctly. If anyone is reading this and finds themselves in a similar situation, my only advice is document everything, immediately, constantly, record conversations if it's legal in your state, save text messages, emails, everything. Hire a good lawyer quickly. Don't wait for the situation to get worse. And above all, don't underestimate how far someone can go when they feel entitled to something you have. The feeling of justice I had when I could finally prove my innocence doesn't erase the trauma of being falsely accused, but at least it prevented my life from being completely destroyed. That's all I can ask for in this shitty situation. I'm 46 years old. I work in construction. I live alone again in the house I bought years ago, thinking about a different future. Some nights, I sit on the porch with a beer and think about all the decisions that brought me here. All the points where I could have said no, where I could have seen who Alexis really was before it was too late. But then I remind myself that I didn't create this disaster. I just tried to do the right thing. And in the end, the truth came to light. Not in the way I would have wanted, not without scars and losses, but it came out. And that will have to be enough.